and welcome to the session on approaches to counseling. Introduction. The primary goal of counseling is to help the counselee grow toward maturity. If we follow this definition, we can see that the concept of maturity is very significant and subtle factor that plays a key role in this understanding of counseling. But what is maturity? The definition of maturity varies with the approaches to counseling. The methods and ways of achieving this goal too vary with approaches. Theories of learning and theories of personality greatly influence theories of counseling. Counseling is an in-depth psychological service which demands understanding and expertise in the area of general psychological functioning of a person to function effectively as a counselor. A trained professional possesses with him familiarity with different approaches to counseling and must following one approach in understanding and interpreting the counseling situation. So, a discussion around the different available approaches is necessary to understand the complexities and limitations involved in the counseling process. This chapter tries to dwell deep into the theoretical and conceptual base of different approaches to counseling. It also tries to come up with a brief discussion around the strength and weakness of counseling. The major approaches discussed in this chapter include psychodynamic approaches, client-centered approach and cognitive behavior approach. It also stresses the need for an eclectic approach towards counseling. Psychodynamic therapies. Psychodynamic therapies draw their conceptual resources from psychoanalysis and generally treat human psyche as a dynamic entity. Psychoanalysis is largely an outgrowth of the work of Sigmund Freud. There are many branches of psychoanalysis such as classical Freudian psychoanalysis and neo-Freudian psychoanalysis, etc. The neo-Freudian have tried to reformulate some of the foundational concepts of classic psychoanalysis. An in-depth discussion of psychoanalysis is beyond the scope of this chapter. What is attempted here is a broad outlay of the basic concepts of psychoanalysis and their importance in counseling setting. Psychoanalysis functions with a tripartite divisions of mind where id, ego and superego are present. The dynamism of mind can be attributed libidinal energy flows which have conscious and unconscious manifestation. There are two major drives in human beings, life drive eros and death drive thanatos. The individual grows up through resolving the developmental task of different psychosexual stages of development. The failures in the successful resolution of early childhood crisis or trauma can result in maladjusted behavior. So, in order to understand the current behavior, one should go deep into the individual's past. In the psychoanalytic approach, behavior is explained as per the early childhood experiences and their effects on the personality. The prominence given to early childhood experiences and deep psychic mechanism make psychoanalytical approaches depth approaches. In other words, a counselor who bases his procedures on depth psychology is the one who considers responses not as they seem but rather as indications or manifestations of some inner structure of experience, a structure formed by early experience. In a counseling setup, a psychologist who wishes to follow psychoanalytical understanding of behavior will look not for direct behavior but for indirect or apparent behavior. So, the techniques employed by depth psychologists too differ. They employ methods and techniques that are capable of eliciting responses that are capable of revealing unconscious impulses and motivation patterns. The most popular example would be projective techniques. These techniques use the defense mechanism of projection to understand the unconscious impulses underlying an outward behavior. In this technique, a series of vague stimuli are presented to elicit responses and it is later analyzed. Rorschach ink blot test and MMPI, Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, are examples of projective techniques and they are used extensively in counseling situations. The proponents of depth psychology focus their attention upon observation and analysis of not of overt behavior but of factors that are assumed to be underlying this behavior. This view has contributed significantly to look at human behavior as inherently uncanny. Through breaking down the barriers of normal and abnormal behaviors, this view helps the therapist from not using debilitating labels and pathologizing language in the counseling setup. Psychoanalytical concepts are foundational in any counseling situation and they exert long-lasting influence too. Client-centered therapy. Client-centered therapy is born out of humanistic impulse within psychology. Humanistic psychology comes into existence as a response to two dominant streams within psychology, namely psychoanalysis and behaviorism. Humanistic psychology argues that psychoanalytic view of human beings is faulty for its excessive attention on the pathological and abnormal behavior. Psychoanalysis is also critiqued for its overemphasis on early childhood experiences. Humanistic psychology treats this as a deterministic view of humans where the opportunity for growth is so limited. Behaviorism, on the other hand, places a great emphasis on the environment. In behaviorism, the attempt is to explain human behavior in terms of stimulus-response chains. It does not give space to inner mechanism or indirect motivation as in psychoanalysis. Humanistic psychology came into existence as an attempt to find a middle path to both these strands of theories. The main proponents of humanistic psychology are Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow. Maslow's hierarchy of needs and self-actualization principle, along with Rogers' non-directive therapy, gave humanistic psychology a comprehensive theoretical framework. Client-centered therapy is treated as non-directive therapy. This therapy insists upon the full expression of the individual. Such an approach, by its very nature, assumes that the person with problems is genuinely seeking way to help himself. Here the primary obligation of the counselor is to augment means for this self-help. The counselor is a facilitating agent or a catalyst causing a change on the part of the client but not entering into this change in the orthodox counseling sense. According to Rogers, the counselor proceeds on the belief that the person he is attempting to help is basically responsible for himself and further is willing to accept this responsibility. One of 6 conditions of counseling in the scheme is that the counselor should rely upon the drive of the client to be mature, productive, independent and well adjusted and not upon his own powers of therapy. Counselor must be able to enter into an intensely personal and subjective relationship with the client. The counselor should be able to appreciate client's worth and empathize with him. Client-centered therapy assumes that individual, no matter how maladjusted he may become, possesses a strong drive to become mature and socially adjusted. As per this view, human beings are equilibrium-seeking creatures who are in an environment of chaos. Another feature of this technique is that the counselor is obliged to set up a warm and permissive atmosphere in which the individual is made to feel free to bring out any of these problems which have upset him. In non-directive therapy, an attempt is made to limit the probing, blaming and interpretation to a minimum. The counselor does not lead the client's conversation in any direction. Rather, he or she will observe the direction in which it unfolds. The counselor reflects the feelings and thought content expressed by the client. Client-centered therapy has made several contributions to counseling and psychotherapy. They have presented a new attitude in the counseling relationship. They have clarified the process and they have developed research procedures for critical analysis of counseling and psychotherapy. The major contributions of client-centered therapy are as follows. The concept of creating an emotional climate of warmth, permissiveness, and acceptance has been clarified by Rogers. This mental hygiene process emphasizes the importance of the counselor's attitudes and skills in being acceptant of the feelings and thoughts of the client, with feelings being more significant. Respect for the growth potential of each client is paramount. The process of learning as modification of behavior has been better described by Rogers. The client usually expresses negative responses, and when he finds them as negative and accepts them as negative, he moves to ambivalence and then positive in attitude and planning for a more mature pattern of living. Rogers also is the pioneer in phonographically recording the counseling interview. This and other devices have brought scientific devices into the art of counseling. In other words, they have extended the repertoire of techniques and tools available for clinical inquiry. Clinical counseling. In contrast to non-directive approach of client-centered therapy, the clinical counseling methods are directive in nature. They are also called trait and factor-centered approach. As per this approach, there are 6 steps in the counseling process. They are: analysis of data concerning counselee. To collect this data, this approach uses many devices such as structured interviews and other tools. The attempt will be to collect maximum amount of information regarding the client or the counselee in a single interaction. Synthesizing the data so as to reveal strength and weakness of the personality. Here the analysis employs widely accepted classificatory manuals to evaluate and understand large quantity of data to meaningful patterns. The most popular classificatory manuals are DSM and ICD classificatory manuals. They come with extensive descriptions of disorders and their symptoms. Diagnosis of the problem by the clinician. Here, clinician makes use of the above mentioned manuals to arrive at a consensus over diagnosis. Along with the diagnosis comes the prognosis of a disorder. Prognosis or predication by the clinician of the future development of the problem is a crucial step defining the intervention plan. Counseling to improve the counselee's adjustment. The diagnosis and prognosis together gives the clinician a concrete picture of the situation. The counseling process is initiated as per the classification of disorder. If the person's classificatory label indicates severe maladjustment, intervention includes remedial measures. Every clinical program consists of a proper follow-up program too. These follow-up sessions are intended to further assist counselee and helps to keep a check and balance on the counseling process. As indicated by the above steps, this approach is in reality an application of the scientific methodology. Greater emphasis is placed upon the skill diagnosis by the counselor, who to do so must have professional training and supervised experience. In contrast with non-directive procedures, the clinical counselor makes greater use of persuasion of the counselee to accept a recommendation. In addition, manipulation of environment such as changing classrooms of certain pupils is more frequently used. Both counseling approaches, however, recognize that the counselee must move towards self-direction. This approach has been severely criticized for the strong labels it generates. The labels can lead to stigmatization and can literally interfere with a person's social and emotional functioning. Several significant contributions also have been and are being made by this approach. The training of qualified counselors has been investigated with specific recommendation for professionalization of counselor function. Research and subsequent reporting by this group have added greatly to the literature in this field, especially in the areas of testing and other measurements and diagnostic tools have contributions been made. Another area of fruitful research has been in the area of follow-up of the student and is improved adjustment as the evidence of a good counseling. A basic approach to traditional educational vocational planning and adjustment has been laid, the parts of which other approach have used as points of agreement or as points of departure. Its emphasis, however, has been on a logical or scientific rather than an emotional approach to choice of curriculum or corruption. An eclectic approach to counseling. The initial controversy in the field of counseling has been over the efficacy of directive and non-directive approaches. Now such controversies gave weight to the recognition of the contribution of each in a developing field. The recent attempts are to tap the full potential of counseling services. Erik Erikson states that a good counselor needs to know and be able to use all methods to shift gears from one method to another, to use the tools which best fit his competencies, to continuously improve himself and to adapt the counseling interview and process to the needs of the situation. There are many popular misconceptions regarding eclectic counseling. The most prominent among them treats an eclectic approach as a process in which you pick and choose from the desired elements from many different theories or systems and fuse them together into a composite of greater worth than any of the elements. But in practice, one can see that such an approach cannot generate a meaningful process to which people could relate to. Logicians points out that the result is usually not synthesized, organized and internally consistent theory, but a strange mixture. To avoid this possibility, it is incumbent upon any theoretical approach to present a methodology which gives each counselee a feeling of consistency and stability. This means reconciliation of divergent points and a coherent pattern and approach must emerge. As we analyze the counseling process further, we may recognize that the minimum elements included are the counselee and his or her needs to be understood by self and counselor, the counselor and his probable role, a situation requiring information or assistance which brought the counselee and counselors together. If it is accepted that the counselee is the most important element, then he and his personality becomes the most important determinant of counseling process. This process should help him develop his strength to be self-directive. If the counselor is flexible and sufficiently well skilled in the different counseling approaches, he will be able to adapt to the needs and values of the counselee in a particular social setting. It is on this basis that an eclectic approach seems reasonable. This implies, however, that rigid individuals, over-emotional people, people who are not empathetic and not intelligent enough to understand and accept the ramifications and realities of a counseling situation will not be able to serve as counselors. The counselor who pushes a particular approach and boasts the effectiveness of that particular approach is blindfolded and will not be able to see the merits of an eclectic approach. Such rigid people are not capable of practicing an eclectic approach to counseling. A counselor who does not have the awareness of his own counseling skills might not be able to tweak them as per the needs of the counselee. In a nutshell, we can see that generating an eclectic approach is a highly demanding task both intellectually and emotionally. The strengths and weaknesses of this particular approach too have brought under research lens. Studies have shown that the eclectic approach can be very effective in certain situations where the situation involves multiple and contending issues. Each approach provides a unique vantage point from which to look at the problem. These vantage points in a way selectively illuminate the different aspects of the problem. If we are using psychoanalytical approach, the focus will be on early childhood experiences. If it is behaviorist therapy, the focus will be on the immediate environment and stimulus response situations. The selective perception provided by each of these approaches is capable of generating a comprehensive picture of the situation which needs a therapeutic intervention. An eclectic approach, on the other hand, looks at the different aspects that can act as origin of behavior and helps not producing a perception of the situation which is skewed to a particular direction. This holistic picture can always result in better care and cure. It will push the practitioner in adopting a balanced view and thus avoid the chances of subjective bias entering into clinical caregiving. But the weakness of this approach, as mentioned in some studies, points out the fact that an eclectic approach can be very weak in generating in-depth interventions. Let us summarize the major points in this session. Counseling is an in-depth psychological service which demands understanding and expertise in the area of general psychological functioning of a person to function effectively as a counselor. The methods and goals of counseling vary with the variations in the approach to counseling. A trained professional possesses with him familiarity with different approaches to the counseling and must following one approach in understanding and interpreting the counseling situation. The major approaches to counseling includes psychodynamic approach, client-centered approach, and clinical approach. A detailed discussion of these different approaches foregrounds the need for an eclectic approach. Now you can try to answer the questions given here. What is the need to understand the different approaches to counseling? What is the importance of past or childhood in psychodynamic approach to counseling? Why client-centered approach to counseling has that name? What is clinical approach to counseling? What is the need for eclectic approach to counseling? For further reading and understanding, you can go through these books. Guidance in Today's School by Mortson, G. Donald and Skimmuller Ellen, M. 1962, published by John Whaley and Sons, New York. Guidance in Classroom by Strength Ruth and Morris Glynn, 1964, published by Collier and Macmillan Limited, London. Thank you for watching this program. Hope that we can meet again with another topic. Till then, take care.